The old woman sat in the dimly lit corner of the run-down nursing home, her frail fingers clutching the edges of a thin, tattered blanket. The walls around her were dull and lifeless, much like the place itself. A forgotten home for the forgotten. She stared blankly at the cracked ceiling, listening to the distant echoes of muffled conversations and the occasional sound of a nurse's hurried footsteps. But none of those voices were the ones she longed to hear. None of them belonged to the son she had raised with every ounce of love in her heart. Just 2 months ago, her life had been different. She had lived in her small but warm house, surrounded by memories of laughter, bedtime stories, and the countless sacrifices she had made for her child. She never imagined that the boy she once held in her arms, who used to cling to her when he was scared of the dark, would one day call her a burden. That word had cut deeper than any wound. "You are a burden to me," he had said, his voice cold, his eyes filled with irritation rather than love. Then, just like that, he left her here. The day he abandoned her still replayed in her mind like a cruel movie she couldn't turn off. It had started with a simple conversation, one that she hadn't realized would be their last, as mother and son, under the same roof. He had been distant lately, always glued to his phone, always sighing when she asked him for help with small things, like reaching the top shelf or taking her to the doctor. She had sensed something was wrong, but never dared to believe it was. That morning, he had driven her to what she thought was a visit, a temporary stay while he handled some personal matters. "It's just for a while, Mom," he had assured her with a forced smile. "You'll be comfortable here." She had believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was her son. She had given him everything, her time, her youth, her dreams. But when she looked around the facility, something in her heart told her this wasn't temporary. The place smelled of disinfectant and sadness. The paint peeled off the walls, and the common room was filled with silent, tired faces, staring out of dusty windows. A nurse had greeted her with a strained politeness, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Confused, she turned to her son. "When will you come get me?" she had asked, her voice filled with quiet hope. His expression hardened. "Mom, this is best for both of us," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Best?" she whispered, her heart pounding. "I don't understand." He sighed, rubbing his temples as if she was exhausting him. "I have a life, Mom. I can't be stuck taking care of you all the time. You need more help than I can give." "But I don't need much," she pleaded, reaching for his hand. But he pulled away. "Just a little help. I don't take up much space." His patience snapped. "You don't get it, do you? I'm tired, Mom. I can't keep doing this. You are a burden to me." Those words, those terrible words. She felt the ground beneath her disappear, her body trembling, as if the cold had seeped into her bones. Before she could say another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hall. She had waited, hours, days, weeks. She kept, believing that maybe he would return, that maybe he had made a mistake, that guilt would find him in the dead of night and bring him back. But he never came. Now, 2 months had passed. The days blended into one another, marked only by the occasional visit from a nurse, or the sound of the old clock ticking against the silence. She sat there, staring at the door, hoping, praying, that one day it would open, and he would walk in, not as the man who had abandoned her, but as the boy who once loved his mother more than anything in the world. But what she didn't know was that life has a way of bringing everything full circle. And soon, her son would learn a lesson he never expected, one that would change everything. The rain poured heavily that evening, drumming against the cracked window of the nursing home. The old woman sat by the window, watching the raindrops race down the glass, her reflection barely visible in the dim light. She had lost weight in the past 2 months. Her cheeks were hollow, and her eyes carried a sadness too deep to describe. She still held on to the hope that he would come back. Maybe he was just busy. Maybe he felt guilty, but didn't know how to face her. A mother's heart is stubborn like that. Even after everything, she couldn't bring herself to hate her son. Meanwhile, her son, Daniel, was living his life as if nothing had changed. He had convinced himself that what he did was necessary. He told himself over and over again that he had no choice, that his mother would be better off in a place with nurses who could take care of her. But deep down, there was a voice he couldn't silence, the voice of his conscience. Every now and then, especially in the quiet of the night, he would hear her voice. Remember the look in her eyes when he had left her there, but he would shake it off. She's fine, he would mutter to himself. She's being taken care of. His life, however, wasn't as perfect as he had imagined it would be. After leaving her behind, work was overwhelming. His relationships felt empty. And no matter how many distractions he threw at himself, a strange emptiness lingered. It was as if something was missing, something he couldn't quite name. His friends noticed his irritation growing, his temper shorter than usual. He started avoiding conversations about family, always steering them toward work or the latest news. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the guilt. One night, Daniel's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello. There was silence on the other end. Then a hesitant voice. Mister, this is Nurse Helen from Brookside Nursing Home. The voice on the phone said. Daniel felt a strange tightness in his chest. Yes, he answered, trying to sound unaffected, though something inside him tensed. I'm calling about your mother, the nurse continued, pausing as if unsure how to proceed. She hasn't been doing well. His stomach dropped. What do you mean? She's been very weak lately, not eating much, barely speaking. We've tried to encourage her, but she doesn't seem to have the will to fight anymore. The nurse sighed softly. I thought you should know. Daniel's grip on his phone tightened. For the first time in months, he felt something crack. Inside him, a deep, sharp guilt that he had been trying to ignore. He had told himself his mother was fine, that she was better off where she was. But hearing it now, knowing that she was fading away in a place she never wanted to be, made his chest ache. Is she okay now? He asked, his voice quieter. She's stable for now, the nurse said, but she's not herself. She spends most of her time staring at the door as if waiting for someone. There was a pause. Waiting for you, Mr. Daniel. His throat tightened. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to see her. That night, Daniel drove through the rain, his mind racing with memories. He thought about how she used to tuck him in at night, how she stayed up late sewing his school uniform when it tore, how she made sure there was always food on the table, even when money was tight. She had done everything for him, and in return, he had abandoned her when she needed him most. When he arrived at the nursing home, the building looked even more run down than he remembered. The walls were dull, the lights flickered, and the air carried a heavy silence. He walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. When he reached her room, he hesitated before opening the door. She was there, sitting in a chair by the window, wrapped in the same thin blanket. She looked smaller than before, her once warm eyes distant. It took her a moment to register his presence. When she finally looked at him, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, disbelief, and something deeper. Pain. Mom! His voice broke as he stepped forward. She blinked slowly, as if he was a dream she wasn't sure was real. Daniel. Her voice was weak, but there was something in it. Hope. I'm so sorry, he whispered, kneeling beside her. I was wrong. I should have never left you here. His hands trembled as he held hers, feeling how frail she had become. Please forgive me. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she said nothing. Then, with a small tired smile, she whispered, You came back. Tears stung Daniel's eyes. He had expected anger, maybe resentment, but instead, all she had wanted was this, to see him, to know she wasn't forgotten. He realized then how deep a mother's love ran, how no matter how much pain he had caused, she still loved him. That night, Daniel didn't leave her side. He spoke to the nursing home director and started making arrangements. He wasn't going to let her spend another night in this place. He would take her home, care for her the way she had always cared for him. A few days later, as they sat in their small but familiar home, Daniel made her a cup of tea, just the way she liked it. She looked around the room, her eyes filling with quiet contentment. It wasn't much, but it was home. As she sipped her tea, she reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. You were never a bad son, Daniel, she said softly. You just lost your way. Tears welled up in his eyes again, but this time, they weren't just from guilt. They were from the overwhelming love he had almost let slip away. He nodded, holding her hand tightly. I won't lose my way again, Mom. And for the first time in a long time, he truly meant it.